Sher Khan Pataudi, he was primarily known as a military man of Pakistan. He was the son of the ruler of Pataudi, the nearest princely state to Delhi. He joined the Indian Army in 1933 and in 1947 opted for Pakistan. In 1957 he resigned and then he was appointed an ambassador to a variety of countries. In 1969 he joined the Yahya cabinet as Minister of Information and National Affairs and was unhappy with the way elections were conducted, and he resigned then again. He has written a book, The Quest of Identity. Now, because of his mixed military background before partition and after the partition of India, and because of his coming from a princely state and then being a diplomat and again also a minister, his book entitled The Quest of Identity, and it writes the entanglement of Muslims in India and Pakistan, has some interesting reading parts. On page 202, he writes, in 1793, the British Governor-General Lord Cornwallis, looking for a practical solution for the collection of revenue and having in mind the English system of stable tenure and confiscation and sale of defaulters, carried out in East India the agrarian revolution known as the permanent settlement. The most populous Muslim area was Bengal. Though Mughal rule existed only in name after the death of Aurangzeb, a powerful Muslim feudal oligarchy continued to exist. Traditionally, the revenue was collected from the hereditary zemindars who paid dues to the Mughal government and later to the East India Company's government under the revenue license that Clive had secured in 1765 from the effete Mughal emperor. They in turn collected what they could extort from the peasantry in their estates, and the differences between the two sums, that is what they collected and what they actually paid, represented their income. The hereditary system was brought to an end by the aforementioned permanent settlement, under which the peasant was secure as long as he paid fixed dues to the zemindar, who, however, was only to hold his position as long as he paid fixed revenues to the government. Though, therefore, the zemindar was recognized as a proprietor, he was no longer hereditary, and his lands could be sold like that of other landlords who got into financial difficulties. Since the Muslim landlords were, with few exceptions, traditionally extravagant, their land gradually but steadily passed into the hands of enterprising Hindu speculators and moneylenders from Calcutta. It was not the mutiny but the permanent settlement which, by dismantling the Muslim feudal superstructure, commanded the end of Muslim supremacy, particularly in East India, which under the Mughals had been ruled by a viceroy with a seat at Dhaka. The mutiny, in fact, was an attempt by the Muslims to regain lost ground and a reaction by the Hindus against social reform. The aftermath of the permanent settlement, the decline of the Muslims, and the rise of the Hindus brought East Bengal completely into the grip of Hindus and British. The Muslim feudal leadership, already demoralized by generation of easy pleasure-seeking lives, had neither the mental vigor nor the capacity to cope with the new turn of events. It therefore passed into oblivion. The feudal Muslim superstructure was over a period of years, steadily replaced by middle-class Hindu superstructure. But whereas from the point of view of the oppressed peasant, a landlord was a landlord, and there was significant difference between old and new zemindars. The extent to which the permanent settlement step by step expropriated the Muslim landlords can be gauged from the fact that by the 19th century most of the land was owned by the Hindus. The virtual extinction of the Muslim feudal aristocracy also affected all levels of Muslim society. In this context, W. W. Hunter, in the book Indian Mussalmans, writes, hundreds of ancient families were ruined, and the educational system of Muslims, which are almost entirely maintained by rent-free grants, received its death blow. And if this was not enough, the little hold the Muslims had in the judicial service and the law, as long as Urdu and Persian continued to be the language of the British administration in Bengal, was lost, when in 1837 the British decided to conduct their business either in English or in the local vernacular language. Such was the situation 100 years after permanent settlement, when in 1898 Lord Curzon, the greatest of the Viceroy, came to usher India into the 20th century. With his passion for efficient administration, he at once saw that the then Presidency of Bengal, which comprised East and West Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, Chota Nagpur and Assam under a chief commissioner, was far too large a charge for any one man governing from Calcutta. He therefore decided to reduce it to manageable proportion, and after one or two schemes had been examined and rejected, the presidency was in 1905 bifurcated into new province of East Bengal and Assam, with its capital at Dhaka, and the rest of the presidency with its capital at Calcutta. This measure, which restored Dhaka to its erstwhile importance, created once again a ruling class of Muslims and promised them greater freedom than they had experienced since the rise of the Hindu Bandralok, that is gentlemen, and was naturally hailed by them. But at the same time, it raised a storm of protest and indignation in Calcutta, whose leaders saw it as a threat to the prosperity, since the new province could now erect its own jute factories, create a port at Chittagong, establish its own high court and university, and in every way be no longer a profitable dependency of Calcutta. But even though these objections were more socio-economic than communal, since the new province was predominantly Muslim, in order to gain nationalist support for a provincial cause, the Calcutta leaders chose to masquerade as nationalists and asserted that the partition was not for administrative reason at all, but in accordance with the sinister policy of divide and rule. A great stride towards the future Pakistan was taken by this. The movement for and against partition therefore became a confrontation between Hindus and Muslims, and the Hindu orientation of the anti-partition movement led the Muslims to believe that their interests would only be safe in Muslim hands. While it is easy to be wise after the event, if for the vested interest of Calcutta the partition of Bengal had not been rescinded, the most populous Muslim region of India would have its own province and government. What shape the Pakistan movement would have taken can hardly be imagined today. A great deal can be learnt on this subject by the official papers that are now being made public by the British government. But whatever the British motives, the consciousness of a separate Muslim identity had by then gathered sufficient force to be recognized as a political entity. To maintain it, a link language became essential, and Urdu, a North Indian language, developed and was spoken by all communities. 50% of the vocabulary was of Arabic or Persian origin and was accepted as the language of the Muslims. This, in the course of time, gained so much importance that it even figured in Mr. Jinnah's famous 14 points. Since Hindu communalists could masquerade as national patriots, Nehru's fire was chiefly against the Muslim League. But he was never against the Muslim League because it was Muslim, but because it was separatist and therefore out of the Indian mainstream. Moreover, as an agnostic, he had an antipathy for any religious-based organization. In fact, no one could be less communal than Nehru, and yet he failed. For this reason, two reasons may be mentioned here. First, on the Hindu side, he accepted the presence of Congress in the Congress Working Committee of Mahasabha and Arya Samaj leaders, and his failure to rid the Congress of such overtly communal, if anti-British elements, provided considerable justification for the anti-Congress posture of the Muslim League. Second, on the Muslim side, he tried to counter Muslim League communalism by counter-communalism. The ill-fated Khilafat movement had a paradoxical effect. Due to its flagrant pan-Islamic appeal, it was the ulama and orthodox Muslims who had rallied around Gandhi, and these elements had remained anti-British, believing that the British, being anti-Caliph and anti-Turk, was therefore anti-Muslim. Nehru, by launching what was called Muslim mass contact movement, mistakenly thought that with the help of religious leaders he could undermine the political leaders. But being a theorist, he did not realize how deeply rooted the concept of Muslim identity was in the Muslim ethos, nor not understanding them that the concept of Muslim, Ummat of Muslim, was Islam's centripetal force and the basic ideology of the Muslim League. In the result, the Muslim League leaders had only to cry to Muslim solidarity was in danger, and with it Islam. For Nehru's movement to fail and the Muslim League had to be saved. All this, in the end, produced Pakistan. It was the strength of the Hindu opposition to the formation of East Bengal by Curzon that gave birth to Muslim communalism. Their demand for separate electorate was a direct result of it. The British may have welcomed and encouraged the demand, but they did not initiate it. Once the separate electorate was accepted in 1907, the rail track leading to eventual independence was laid. The track has two rails, one Hindu and one Muslim. They lie side by side, but they never meet. The Muslims were prepared to accept joint electorate at all parties' national convention in Calcutta in 1927, but it broke down on the issue whether they would have 33.5% or 30% of the seats in the central legislature. Therefore, it is wrong to blame the British for Pakistan. The credit for it squarely rests on the Hindu shoulders, who through their Baniya niggardly attitude created suspicion and fear in the Muslim ranks, which brought about Pakistan under the leadership of Jinnah, the man who had gone hoarse shouting for Muslim-Hindu unity for 10 years and eventually took a stand for a separate homeland for Muslims, which he got in the shape of Pakistan in 1947 through his tenacity and honesty. This is an interesting aspect, particularly with regard to his comments on the effects of the permanent settlement. Although it is known that the Hindu pressure to cancel the division of Bengal area was a very important factor in the making of the Muslim League and the joint electorate, which ultimately led to the creation of Pakistan. Thank you very much. I might be quoting more from this book later on.